Hello and welcome to Epiphanies with Elango. We've got an interesting guest again today, and we've got Jim Morrison from Doors on the call. Welcome, Jim. I'm kidding. This is James Morrison. I can never do justice to his introduction. Ex-FBI agent, former customer of ours, worked extensively in the technology business, very known name in the cybersecurity space. Thank you, James, for making time and for being on the show. I'd love to welcome you, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners, because I don't think I can do justice to the plethora of stuff that you've done in your career and the credits that you've accumulated over the years.
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me on. I mean, it's been a journey. I don't think my journey's over yet, but it's funny when you look back at a career and you go, wow, I guess I did do that. And I guess I did, I started programming back in the 80s with a lot of high schoolers, joined the military back in 88, and was lucky enough to end up in computer communications in that early time. And went to the Philippines, was there for 2.5 years and had some great experiences working with early internet. The DDN and the AFNet node that we had there. I became a Unix sysadmin, taught myself how to do Unix. Me and a Navy guy down in the naval section in Subic Bay were going back and forth on notes. Went to the transferred after Mount Pinatubo blew, which is right over here. 1991 was there when Pinatubo exploded in exactly 30 years ago almost. I think it's April 15th or something, I think is when it blew. Went to Colorado Springs, we did a blue suit transition, moving satellite command and control over from contractors to blue suit, and was named one of the first system administrators on the Unix system there. So I became a database administrator, Unix sysadmin. Those were the days where you had everything. You were the network guy, you were the computer guy, and but at the same time I was going to school. I was trying to finish my bachelor's. I knew I needed to finish that, and I finished an engineering degree from Colorado Tech. And now I was caught. Now I was like, I can't become an officer. They were really not letting a lot of people become officers at that point. So I left. I decided it was time to transition. Joined Lockheed Martin in Kirtland Air Force Base as a database administrator, system administrator on Solaris systems. So I did Solaris sysadmin for a while. Network, did the old FDDI rings and token rings and just sort of really worked through those technologies, teaching myself, learning from the people that are around me. But I didn't like the government contract side, so I joined the bureau. I answered an ad in the paper. I still have it. People don't remember what newspapers were, but there was an advertisement that was about that big, and it said FBI needed system administrators. I was like, I can do that. I joined the bureau, became a Novell sysadmin, Novell and Token Ring, and then transitioned us from Token Ring into Ethernet and Windows 2000, and was one of the first sysadmins, on that. And then became the IT manager for the state of New Mexico for the FBI, and I was there for 9/11. So I was assigned to that office when 9/11 occurred. I was also on the evidence response team, which there's a totally different story set there. I just wanted to be involved in cases, and I did that for about 7 years, and then transitioned. Figured it was time, so I moved into the back room, started doing network engineering. Did that for about 7 years and said, time to change, because it seems to be that's my way my world works. And it was time to go home. And I was from Houston. And so I figured I transitioned back to Houston, and I joined the cyber squad here in Houston as a senior computer scientist. We were the first class. I was in the first class of computer scientists. There were 22 of us. And our job was to be that technical lead, working cases, from a technical aspect, taking the big data to try to be proactive against nation states and criminal actors. I worked the Houston Astros intrusion, where a St. Louis Cardinal employee was logging into the Houston Astros scouting database. And so I mean, you learned as you went, taught myself different programming languages, and mainly because sometimes we had to capture code that was being used by malicious actors. And decode that, and actually put that, and then help write reports to help companies recognize that. Helping write. So we became certified ethical hackers. There were 100 of us, 110 of us at the peak. We were ethical hackers. We went out to companies, did digital forensics. Built elk stacks. Big data. Chewing up the data that we had. And then about 3 years before I finished, I said, I feel like we're not doing enough for the businesses in the Houston area, especially. And I started becoming the speaker for cybersecurity in the Houston area. A lot of oil and gas events, a lot of petrochemical events, but also a lot of small and medium businesses. And 70% of cyber attacks are hitting small and medium businesses. And it was sad because these companies would come to me and say, "Hey, I got hacked, I got ransomware. What do I do?" And because in the bureau we weren't allowed to really ever suggest product. We could only say, "I'm really sorry, report it to the FBI." It was almost frustrating at times. I had worked with the cyber division back at headquarters on how do we improve some of our reporting mechanisms. So we use an internet crime complaint center, and people would file a complaint, saying they'd lost $100,000 and never hear back from the FBI. And I said, I didn't feel like that was the right answer. And so they've done a number of improvements to improve the customer service aspect. But after I hit 30 years of government service, after 7-8 years of doing that job, and I said, maybe it's time to come out and try to do something different. And Hewlett Packard Enterprise was, here in Houston, and I had a relationship with them and had talked at some of their events about cybersecurity, security at the firmware server level. And they said, "Why don't you come and join us and do cybersecurity?" So for 15 months, I'm a customer focused, which is kind of an interesting question because it's not me talking, about my cybersecurity internal to HP. It's me going out to customers and saying, "What are you trying to do, and how do we get you to a security model?" And I have a heart for that. I really think that there's a lot of opportunity out there to help companies see a better security path, even if it's not an HPE product. And I know sometimes that gets my HPE handlers a little, kind of off the cuff. But there's a ton of technological solutions, and maybe just let me find out where you're trying to go. What's your transformation? And but also this is kind of a really impressive is people remain the biggest security threat we have. Yeah. And COVID last year, with everybody working from home, you're 3 times more likely right now to be phished from home than you were ever before that. And so it's really a change of paradigm, and every company that has remote workforce is struggling with how do we handle this new paradigm? How do we handle work from home? Because when we built our security network, in that castle and moat idea, right? And all of the data and all of my employees were inside of my castle, and I had one exit. I had a firewall, and that was my exit. But that's not the reality anymore. Our reality now is that 75% of the data that's created in our networks is created at the edge. It's created by mobility. It's created by IoT. It's created by, now our employees. So security, a lot of the security products that we thought would protect us against the threats aren't working. So it's time to have a better conversation. It's time to really think about it and challenge ourselves to, could we do better? And I'll say that internal, every technology company is the same way. How do we do it better? How do we make sure that what we're providing you isn't something that and I'm an engineer by trade, and I sat in the back room many a time and said, this is what that person needs. And I built this product, and then it went out there and it didn't sell. It was crickets. So, right? So it's not about an engineer telling you what you need. It's about you coming back to me and saying, this is what I need. And then I go back and help make sure that we're pushing the designs in a way that's customer driven. And I think that's the world that we have to start living in.
So James, this is, I think, firstly on your introduction, I'm like, my God, I'm going to be tired if I have to live a life as different and as so many changes, self-educated. So I'm going to reserve the FBI jokes for later. I'm going to come back.
Oh, bring them. Now that I'm retired, I can take them.
The Jim Morrison and the FBI jokes are coming later. I love what you said, right? Earlier we said we were in the castles, we had moats, And now, not just COVID, just the whole fog computing, edge computing, IoT's changed everything for us.
Yeah.
And while there are probably 5% of the companies in the world that are born in the cloud, digital native, there's 95% that's still sitting in legacy. So what advice would you have for for companies that are 95%, the 95% that are in legacy, still not on cloud, still in a confused state, if I would, some on-prem, some on cloud, manufacturing units, employees working from home, working from factories. There are no discrete units now, right? Everything is contiguous across. What advice would you have for companies in that 95% bracket?
Well, change always comes from the top. I mean, whether we like it or not, I mean, you have to come up with a use.
Or they say the fish rots from the head.
I like that. So hold on a second. My Alexa went off. There we go. We can talk about cybersecurity there. So the first thing you need to do is first you got to come up with a use case, right? So I think there's actually an opportunity here with like remote workforce. Virtual desktop infrastructure is a really easy way to start justifying using the cloud in a way that will protect us, right? Because we initially looked at cloud in a way to share data. And the public cloud has been this about sharing data across our entire portfolio, but security was kind of an afterthought. And now what's starting to happen is we're starting to see breaches that are occurring in cloud spaces. And there was a really big one about videos that were being stored in a cloud provider, and the data was lost because they didn't have good security mechanisms. So now I think we see the world as hybrid. This is the conversation we're having, and there's some data that you got to keep close, right? So let's talk about first. What's the easiest thing to take, right? So you have a huge problem, cloud, right? Let's break it down. What are the aspects of cloud that would be immediately useful to you? And if you start down that pathway, if you say, let's say we start with virtual desktop infrastructure and it works, right? So you work with a company like HPE or whatever, and you say, you know what? I want to deploy those virtual desktops to protect myself, protect the data, and it works. Well, now success breeds a secondary conversation, because then you can say, well, you know what? I also want to home our apps. So next stage is I want to start. So take it incrementally, but make sure that you know the appetite of the company you work for, right? Everybody has a different appetite for risk. And I tell this to every company I talk to. You're all different. Your network, there's no homogeneous networks anymore. There's no green fields where I can just do what I want. You've got Cisco devices, you've got Aruba devices, you've got HP, you've got Dell, you've got all of these, Lenovo. How do we increment that? How do we take one step forward and make sure that we're moving more in the cloud world? So that's why one thing that HP has this thing going forward of every service we offer will be offered in the cloud by next year. IoT in the cloud, right? So every web camera could be homed in the cloud. OT in the cloud. I had a great conversation with an oil and gas guy about taking all of its OT devices and pumping all of the app side of it into the cloud. And he was like, wow, I just didn't even think about it that way. So it's having, and I think conversations with people that I have a vested interest in HP, don't get me wrong, but I just want to have a security conversation.
The HPE plug that you're doing.
Well, but the question I look at is let's have a security conversation, not a product conversation. Let's just talk about a cloud conversation or a security conversation. Start there. Start with the conversation. And I mean, the world doesn't happen unless it's on paper. That's what I learned from the Bureau, right? If it's not on paper, it never happened. So let's talk about what are the pros and the cons of the cloud? What do you like? What don't you like? Are you afraid of the security? And then I think that's the place to start and move in that direction.
And James, thank you. I'll just summarize. I think change starts from the top. Start with use cases. There are no green fields. Incremental is fine. You don't need to do game changers. And accept that the world's changed and put it on paper. Have discussions.